So talking about that, Arise international correspondent Karl Bostic joins us now for the latest in Niger Republic. It's good to have you, Karl. Are there any more details for why the Ecowas meeting in Accra was cancelled?
Well, it was scheduled to be a meeting of defense leaders, defense ministers from Ecowas countries to work on a timetable for the deployment of special forces. Apparently, they're saying it's been suspended indefinitely. This could be for legal reasons, technical reasons, financial reasons. Just keep in mind, this is an undertaking that ECOWAS has really never taken before on this scale before. It's intervened since 1990 in various coup-type situations. But the last coup they intervened in was 2017 in Gambia. Gambia is the smallest, or one of the smallest countries in Africa. In area, it's less than 1% the size of Niger. In other words, Niger is 100 times the size of Gambia, twice the size of France, the size of Texas. You need a lot of troops to kind of, go into Niger. At the very least, we're looking at maybe 3 countries, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, which is Ivory Coast, and Senegal, which have committed to deploying troops. We're talking thousands of troops. Nigeria, as the leader of ECOWAS, has historically been the one contributing the most troops. So there's the issue of, what is the composition of this force? How many forces? And then how many are needed to go into a country the size of Niger? And because of you saw reports about domestic dissent in Nigeria, of all countries, about why people are very anxious about this. So this is where perhaps financing from the EU does come in. At the very least, in terms of a timetable, then this could take days, certainly not days, but maybe weeks to pull all of this together in terms of getting a coalition force, at minimum maybe 2 weeks, for example. But to give another example, just how formidable a challenge this is, there's been no real coordination on this size before ever for ECOWAS. And secondly, when you talk about Niger, this is a Western-trained army. They've been trained by the U.S., they've been trained in Europe, and at the same time, you're looking at a country that's actually worked against counterterrorism with other countries, called the G5. They've already partnered with Mali, Burkina Faso, and Mauritania in coordinating the fight against counterterrorism. So they have experience doing this. And then finally, even the head of the junta, General Chiani, he was a former ECOWAS peacekeeper. He led a battalion. He knows how ECOWAS works. He knows how these interventions work. So the longer this takes, they're going to be more deeply entrenched. But you need to keep in mind that this is a military option only, because Tinubu wants to say all options on the table. Meanwhile, the window of diplomacy still remains open.
All right. Karl, do we know anything else about the condition of President Bazoum?
Well, it's really disheartening, just what little we do know already, because now we're looking at day 11 or day 12 even. Electricity has been cut off his residence. Put things in perspective. Even though the country is now going through constant rolling blackouts, Nigeria, it's cut off its supply of electricity to Niger. Niger gets about 70% of its electricity from Nigeria, and so the country is really steeped in darkness, 10 hours at a time. However, the capital, Niamey, does have electricity, or at least on a more regular basis. But the junta has actually just simply cut off the electricity. You have electricity cut off, you have no running water, you have no fresh food. They're living off dried pasta and canned food. This is according to an interview given by the President Bazoum's daughter in France, in which she said she had communicated with him, and he's also lost weight. He's losing weight on a daily basis, and his son, who's in his 20s, he's lost at least 15 to 20 kilograms already. If anything, you've got really the UN, the EU, and the US now more concerned about his safety and health than even a diplomatic window. In fact, the unwritten, the unspoken rule in diplomacy is that in cases of coups like this, no harm should befall an ousted leader. If something does happen to him, and of course we all hope that he is safe and healthy, if something does happen to him, this could turn out to be the worst of all coups.
Yeah, and they're losing their bargaining chip at that as well. Now, Karl, do these latest protests tell us more about how much popular support the junta has?
What's interesting is that you're seeing these shows of support. You had a stadium rally of 30,000 people last Sunday. You have demonstrations outside the French base showing the hostility that they feel towards the French presence, the French legacy as a former colonial ruler. This is part of the narrative that the junta wants to really kind of put out to kind of justify its actions, to even justify its legitimacy, that all the problems besetting Niger right now can be laid at the door of the French because of their legacy in terms of exploitation. However, you need to keep in mind also this: ever since they took power, they've banned all protests. The very first day of the takeover, you had protests that were pro-government that were dispersed outside the presidential palace by tear gas. You have the announcement now of a resistance movement, a potential counter-coup movement against the junta by a very powerful, popular leader from the northern part of Niger, a leader of the Tuareg. Without support of the Tuareg in northern Niger, this is going to be a very divided country. And actually, for an Ecowas, support force to really succeed, it needs the support of popular support. And that's what the junta wants to stifle. And that's why we see these demonstrations. But what's also interesting, tellingly enough, you've got not only French base in Niger, you've got 2 U.S. bases of 1,100 U.S. troops. We've seen no such protests at all outside the U.S. Bases because they don't have, the historical legacy of France. And that's why the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State offered their services as a mediator. Again, keeping in mind, the U.S. is also a very, very powerful Western partner. Niger, a very poor country, 40% of its budget comes from foreign aid. The U.S. is a big driver behind that. And that budget support, that pays the salaries of soldiers. So you have to ask yourself, how are these soldiers getting paid if they've now cut off budget support, if there's no foreign aid coming in?
All right, what more do we know about the possible involvement by Russia?
Well, what's interesting is that, when Putin hosted African heads of state in St. Petersburg for the Russia-Africa Summit at the end of July, only about 17 countries showed up, and Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, was there, and he posed with African leaders, such as the leader of Central African Republic and Mali, where Wagner has a presence. And the hot topic there, besides the cutoff or the collapse of the grain deal with Ukraine, was the coup in Niger. And Yevgeny Prigozhin was offering the services of Wagner to Niger. The U.S. has indicated there is no evidence whatsoever that the Russians were behind this coup at all. However, you could almost say, in a cynical way, Wagner, they've never met a coup they didn't like, because they are basically, counting on the weakness of governments, which is what we've seen in Central African Republic, in Mali, and perhaps even Burkina Faso, where their main role is really to protect the junta and to strengthen them against internal dissent. They aren't there to fight the jihadists. So they've offered their assistance to protect the junta in the face of any sort of dissent locally. At the same time, we know, for example, the number 2 head of the junta had flown to Mali last week or earlier in the week on Monday to meet not only with the Wali leadership, but also with Wagner members. But however, we have not seen any invitation to Wagner at all. It'd be interesting to see, though, if the Ecowas force is mobilized, will Wagner be asked to come in? And if they are asked to come in, that could really be a red line for the West.
Indeed. Karl Bostic, Arise International correspondent, would like to thank you for the update on Niger. It's good to have you with us.